This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Thursday, March 8th, 2018. I have a special guest today, and that's Fionna Agomuoh. And she's a freelance tech journalist. She does a lot of phone coverage. So I thought, hey, it's Women's Day. I need to have a woman on the show. Women Unite. How you doing, Fionna?
I'm really good. How about you?
I'm doing great. I have a bit of a cold, to be honest. So if you guys,
sorry.
my listeners, it's fine. My listeners are probably going to say, you're not doing great. You sound weird. And so I just have to be straight up with them. So we just got back from MWC. And what a show, huh?
Definitely very interesting this year.
What is your general takeaway? Let's start with that, because I think everybody wants to kind of have a summary now.
Well, it's really interesting because I actually got stopped by someone from the GMSA. I believe he was an analyst and kind of asked me the same question. And I was just kind of like, I feel like this year, while interesting, I feel like a lot of the showcase is kind of improvement on the features that we're already used to, especially with things like camera, and certain things are maybe getting a little bit more RAM here, and, designs are being tweaked and things like that. But there's not really so much of an emphasis on the new right now. And, I was talking with this analyst and we were just saying, it's kind of a good thing at this point, just because I feel like there was such a long time where it was next big thing. Here's the new feature. Here's the first gen of this, and this. And, if we have like a moment to kind of just tweak things and perfect them, that would probably be beneficial to consumers and probably even to, the companies bringing out these things where when things are at their top quality, more people will want to buy them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, for me, the biggest thing that I think the industry needs to improve is updates, right? I mean, for people who are going to keep a phone for 2 years, getting updates in a timely manner and getting especially security updates. And I think some companies are doing it, but I want to see, this is my goal for this year, 2018, is to really bang on them hard so that they understand that, look, we know you're in the business of making hardware and selling new hardware. And most of the listeners here are going to buy a new phone every 6 months, every year. The reality, though, is the average person out there is not. And they need some love. They need to know that their 2-year-old phone, before they finally give up on it and buy a new shiny one, is still going to be usable and still going to be, up to date, at least as up to date as it can be. I think 3 to 6 months delay on updates is reasonable, at least on major OS updates. I think that no more than 1 or 2 months delay on security updates is essential. And I think that fits into what you were saying, So maybe we don't see some exciting new features so much as we see the industry actually maturing and bringing us what we really need.
Definitely. I mean, that is the thing about OS updates, especially on Android, where now it's kind of like, a joke among all of the journalists and bloggers, where it's like, okay, well, how long are we going to have to wait for Oreo? Which device is going to get it first and things like that. And it's like, we see it and we're exposed to it, but it's not that it's not for us, but, the whole point is that everyone should experience it. All of these new features, we're telling our readers and the people that follow us, oh, well, this software has this feature, but by the time their device gets it, they've already bought a new one. And that device is then, 6 months behind because the new software is out. So, definitely there's just that need for the streamlining. And it's just kind of really interesting. We have Google I/O coming up really soon. And last year was the whole thing about Project Treble. And then you have a lot of companies where their devices are still not even kind of adopting that protocol yet still. So it's kind of like, where is that going to come in? Yeah,
absolutely. So, obviously the big star of the show was the Galaxy S9. And I kind of want to get your feel for your thoughts on this phone. Obviously, as we are talking evolution instead of revolution, this is very much an evolutionary phone. I mean, I think it's kind of like, the TikTok cycle I talked about in the last podcast, where the Galaxy S6 was a big change, and then it kind of was a tick, and then the 7 was a talk, it was the evolution of the 6, and then the 8 was like a tick, like a radically, well, not radically, but it was quite a bit of an improvement over the 6 and 7 design with the infinity display and the lack of bezels. And then we now have kind of the talk again with the Galaxy S9, where we've taken the same form factor and refined it. I'm personally on board. I think this is reasonable. I don't think there was anything wrong with the Galaxy S8's design, frankly. I would have liked the corners to be a little squarer, and I got that in the note because I like square-looking phones for some reason. But other than that, the fingerprint reader needed to be placed in a new way, and they fixed that to some extent. There's a lot of discussion about whether it should be a little lower or not. What's your take on that, actually?
It's really funny. While we were at the launch, I actually did not focus on the fingerprint reader that much. So I couldn't even tell you in general, I do think that the moving it to the center was a good choice. And I was thinking about this earlier today, just because I knew we were going to talk about it. Like, my joke is kind of like, I use the Galaxy S8 right now, and I've kind of gotten used to that weird placement just because of the case that I keep on my phone. It kind of serves as a barrier for me to know where the fingerprint reader is and to know where to put my finger. So I've personally gotten used to it. But not everyone's going to get used to that. But definitely when I get a chance to get a little bit more hands-on time with the S9, I'm really excited to hopefully get a review model and be able to play with it a little bit more. But just in general, I do think that the centered placement is just a little bit more natural. Most people are right-handed and, using their pointer finger as the finger that they're authenticating with. So, it just kind of just makes it easier. That's pretty much the gist of it.
Totally. No, I agree. I mean, it was needed. I think that you're right. You get used to it. I got used to it myself on my S8 Plus and my Note 8. But at the same time, it's like, guys, come on, like, who thought of this? And and now it's better. I mean, it's not ideal. I still think that the Pixel 2 XL, LG phones like the G6 and the V30 have a better placement of the fingerprint reader and more natural. I think Huawei in the past and I guess in the present with the Mate 10 Pro has a more natural positioning of the the fingerprint reader. And so I think, I think it's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, just people that I've been talking to that have. It's not really spoken out loud a lot, but I've spoken to some kind of insiders that have actually admitted, like, hey, this rear fingerprint scanner kind of across the board, across the industry, was kind of like the last ditch effort after the in-display fingerprint scanner wasn't ready for showtime as soon as companies wanted it to be. So, it's really interesting how now kind of refining the fingerprint scanner is the thing where, we're still probably going to have to wait a little bit longer before the in-display fingerprint scanner is a mass-produced thing.
Yeah, but actually, honestly, I think the future is what Apple's done. I know that, of course, the Face ID has its flaws. I have an iPhone 10. I purchased one just because I asked for Apple for a review. And I have a good relationship with Apple, but, my numbers are not high enough on the podcast yet to really get that kind of love. So I bought one. And I have to say, it's a pretty significant milestone for Apple, but I think Face ID is really the thing, and I think that it has its flaws. Maybe 1 out of 10 times it fails for me, and it's not bad. It doesn't drive me nuts. It doesn't. I remember the fingerprint reader in the Galaxy S6 not working for me a lot, and me turning it off. I remember the iris scanner, or whatever it's called, on the Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus and Note 8 not working for me either, almost ever, and me turning it off just because it was cumbersome. And so I think the future is continuous face authentication to the point where you can be looking at your phone and you can give it to your kid and they can't do anything with it. You know what I'm saying? And then they give it back to you and it works. And I think that's actually a great secure future. A lot of people are kind of creeped out by it, but I really think that's the way to go. And at that point, you don't need a fingerprint reader anymore. Yeah. So I think there's going to be an interim time, and I'm not against having both. I think choice is good. You know, I'm an Android user primarily, so I like choice. And but I think that the future is Face ID or something like it, and nobody's delivered yet. The Galaxy S9 has a hybrid system that basically does, so face recognition has been in Android since, I believe, Jelly Bean or Ice Cream Sandwich, like a long time ago.
Ice Cream Sandwich, it's been a while.
Yeah, see, thank you. And so I think because of that, we forget about it, but it's very basic. It can be full of the photo, as we all know. So there's a few, with Apple kind of bringing back this face identification, face authentication to the foreground with the iPhone 10, there's a few companies that have come out with slightly more advanced systems because we have more computational power that don't require depth sensing. So OnePlus on the 5 and 5T, started on the 5T, did basically they look at your facial features and distances between various features on your face and have a little more accurate recognition that is harder to be full with a photo, but can still be full with a photo. And they don't use it as a main means of authentication. They use that as kind of like a backup or like a secondary that you can't use for payment, and it works well. The View 10 from Honor does the same thing. Actually, a lot of the Honor phones do. And I saw a bunch of phones at MWC that were mid-range phones that were basically advertising that feature. And so what we're looking at is like kind of an improved Face ID of what was in Ice Cream Sandwich. But that's not what we really want. Like what I'm talking about is pure depth sensing, mapping the 3D features of your face like Apple is doing. And so far, nobody's done it. I think Huawei might be the first with a P20, and that'll be a good segue for us. But I think that what Samsung's doing, a lot of people like Miriam, they're doing something with the Galaxy S9. No, what they did is they combined an improved Face ID like that with the iris scanner so that the iris scanner doesn't seem as dumb as it is. And that's really not the solution because you can't use that for payment. So that's not what we want. I mean, basically, right now, if you have a Galaxy S9 and you want to be secure, use the fingerprint reader, okay? So what's your take on all these technologies? I mean, do you think that, obviously it's only a matter of time till somebody does proper depth sensing 3D mapping of your face on Android. But do you think this is the future?
I feel like just biometrics in general, there's just going to be that push towards the ease and security. And I feel like especially like the people that are in the industry right now, we're all people who've grown up in like the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that. And we kind of grew up on that stuff. Like, all of our TV and our movies was all, Terminator, and you're running down the hall and you use your eye to open a door and stuff like that. So I feel like that's kind of where the inspiration comes from. So it's just kind of ingrained in us that, hey, like if I have a device that I use every day, the easiest way to use the functionalities and to get into it and have it work seamlessly is to just kind of be able to not necessarily even look at it, but put it in my face and just have it work.
For sure. But I think ultimately there's so many uses for it. Like, in the same way as Alexa and Google Assistant are learning our voices, right? They're getting better and better in recognizing each of our voices. I think there is a future where various ecosystems like potentially Google and then potentially Apple and potentially Amazon in the future, if they do some sort of a camera equipped product that's more popular, like I know they have a couple of, they have that alarm clock Echo thing and they have the Echo Show or whatever. But imagine eventually that all the, $30 to $50 Echoes that we buy around our houses are going to probably have a camera in them. What I'm saying is that this is going to be a common thing, authentication through camera and voice combined, to the point where I think, like, if you look at Amazon, they own Whole Foods. So what if I walk into a Whole Foods and instead of, not as advanced as that crazy store they have in Seattle where you can grab things off the shelves and walk out, but I'm thinking something a little more secure where you still have a cash register line. You might have a cashier, so you can still have that awesome interaction with, like I'm a regular at my Whole Foods, for better or for worse. But I know the people there, and I'm happy to see them every time. So I would still love that interaction, but it's the payment part. Right now I use tap to pay, and that works fine. But imagine a future where it recognizes your voice as you're having a conversation with the cashier from all the Amazon Alexa data it has, and it recognizes your face from various cameras placed around the cash register. Like it can get a 3D mapping of your face, and you never have to pay. It just pays automatically when you go through the counter. And you can maybe set it up so that you still use your phone to tap if you don't like that. But I think that's going to happen. And we inevitably are running into a future where facial, and audio authentication or voice authentication are going to be the way over fingerprinting. Fingerprinting might be added as an additional step to further secure the transaction. But I feel like that's the way to go. And, there's so many cameras out there. People are freaked out when I talk about this stuff. But have you ever been to the UK? I mean, it's full of cameras everywhere. We've had that for decades. It's not going to change. All that's going to be changing is that these cameras are going to be able to see us from different angles and create a 3D map of our face, and going to be able to prove that we're really who we are, for better or for worse. I understand there's huge privacy implications. There's huge implications around, what's it called, surveillance. And I want to validate that. I don't have a solution to those things, but I do think that our future is going to be better served once, these entities are able to interact with us that way. And it's up to us to push them hard to make sure that their privacy and security aspects are on top. Google has never let me down on security. I have had Google accounts that are critical to me for over a decade now. And I have never had a data breach. I have never had a problem. I've had, sometimes it's gone down and it's, but it's been up within minutes or hours. So it's possible. And I think people who worry too much about that maybe shouldn't.
I would definitely just like to say, the idea, that concept of being able to walk into a store and just kind of, have that seamless interaction. I'll start with that. That is a very interesting concept, because that's something that I talk to people a lot about, with the idea of kind of like payment apps. And then you've got every company wants their own version of a payment app, and none of them are compatible or seamless. You have to set them up all together. You have to set them up separately, And that's kind of one of the fatal flaws of it, because it's you can't, it's not a universal system where, for example, you have a credit card, you can use, with the exception of American Express, where some people don't like to take American Express, you can take your credit card and use it wherever you want, and it works the exact same, and it's not contingent on various different technologies that companies want to use to differentiate themselves. And it kind of reminds me of back when I was in high school and I was in an economics class, and the teacher was saying that kind of the primary staple of money is the ease of use. That's kind of what makes a money system catch on and stay on. And that's, I use credit cards as an example, and that's kind of the ease of use. It's easy to carry. It's, something that people understand. That's kind of what made credit cards catch on. And even while all of these different types of payment systems are coming up, people are still using their credit cards the same as they always have. So there would have to be something that is a fundamentally easier functionality than a credit card for it to become a mainstream payment system. So I do think that's a very interesting concept of, being able to just kind of do your daily chores and have the payment and not have to worry about it in that fashion.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Well, yeah. I was just to build on kind of the security idea that you were talking about. That, I also kind of have to agree from the aspect of, we kind of live in a world. Understanding people are worried about privacy, but then when something goes wrong, it's well, where was the security camera? That's kind of like the first question that's asked when, something goes wrong. Well, why is there no identification for the perpetrator? Because this place wasn't secure. So like
it cuts both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah. So again, all of it is kind of just ties into that general idea of ease of use, and again, if people, that's why we have online shopping. So if you're that, it's kind of like if you're that unnerved, you can buy all of your groceries, or you can buy your Whole Foods groceries on Amazon now if you want to. It's just, that again, there tends to be more people who are kind of more interested in moving forward in that way. We have all this technology and everyone wants it to be at the consumer level. So there are, you kind of have to just roll with the punches and get used to things. Really?
I agree. But I think you brought something up that's very interesting. You're right about the siloing of these systems. They all live in silos right now. Amazon's an Amazon, Google's and Google, Apple's an Apple. But here's the thing a lot of people forget. And is that, how is this Stripe, I believe, is the company that does provide credit card authentication and transaction services for e-commerce and point of sale, right? That's their business model, right? They're basically, and Square's another one. They're in between the banks, credit card companies, basically, and the consumer being both stores that need point of sales and consumers like you and me, and so there's no reason that tomorrow, and honestly Amazon's the best position to do this. There's no reason for tomorrow Amazon to say, hey, we're providing this functionality to anyone, right? Like we have and as a payment service, so you don't have to be in a silo anymore. You don't even have to have an Amazon account, right? I mean, it's going to only be better if you have an Amazon account because it'll have gathered data about you, like your voice, because it recognizes your voice that way. But the reality is, I think we're very close to that. And, maybe that's the solution. So I don't think that these closed systems are necessarily a problem, because they could be opened up, to the rest of the ecosystem. And, I think the first company to do that is going to be the one who wins. And in that sense, I think Amazon's best place for it, because they are the e-commerce king, right? They have sure, they have the vested interest of their own e-commerce system, but ultimately, if they can gather more data about users and more voice data and more image data, through cameras, then it's going to benefit them in some way or another, that they can even, open it to other e-commerce, providers, and potentially to be an intermediary like Stripe or Square. So there's that potential. I think we shouldn't forget that, walled gardens can be opened. And I mean, by open, I don't mean open in a security and privacy way. Yeah. I mean, in a available to, on a per transaction skimming basis, like Amazon would make some money on this, right? But keep it still, in a black box so that it's secure. So I think, we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to go back to, since this is what I love about my podcast, is that we go into tangents like this, and it's fantastic. Yeah. But I did want to wrap up on the Galaxy S9 a little bit before we move on to some other stuff. And I want to get your take on that camera system. As I said in the last podcast, you weren't there, but I'll fit you in real quick. We had a group podcast at Mobile Congress with a bunch of folks. And, it's very Samsung to see them improve the camera hardware significantly with this dual aperture system. They're not the first. Nokia did a dual aperture system, the N86, back in 2009. But they're the first to do it in a super slim, super compact package that is in a mainstream smartphone. And it's absolutely, you can't fight physics. This is going to help in significant ways to have two apertures, especially one that's f/1.5 optimized for low light and f/2.4 optimized for daylight, right? It's going to give us better pictures all around. But it's so Samsung because they're just asserting their might in hardware, right? They're obviously doing computational photography a little bit with some AI features in the camera. Everybody has to compete. Google has shown us the way, and the Google Pixel 2 XL and Pixel 2 are still slaying in terms of imaging performance based on purely computational photography. I mean, the sensor and lens on the Pixels is not like top notch. It's good, but it's not like the best you can get. So my point is, we're seeing Samsung take their hardware might and say, look, we can still do some cool stuff with the hardware, and on top of that, add the computational stuff. What's your take on that camera in general? Do you think that was overkill? Do you think it's going to be beneficial? Do you think that, like me, that it's typically Samsung being Samsung, kind of like Apple? It's Apple at the heart is a hardware company, and when they do things like Face ID, it's really driven by hardware, and then they put the software on top to make it nice.
Yeah. I definitely agree. It is a very Samsung move, and you kind of just chuckle. I remember when just kind of the preliminary teaser started coming out, and it was just kind of the whole idea of like the camera reimagined, and I'm like, oh, really, Samsung? Let's see this one. But I again, the camera, the photos that I've seen, and friends and have been running. We were running around Barcelona with the S9, and at the launch event, testing out the camera. I mean, the camera quality is very good, and I do think Samsung put a lot of very well spent effort into the camera. One thing that a lot of us did observe is that in turn, the whole focus on low light, that's kind of just been like a general trend of focusing on how to improve low light imaging has been a thing for a long time. And the S9, it does really good with low light if you're taking still photos. So there was one night we were out and playing with the S9 and noticed if you're kind of like moving around, if you're kind of trying to snap a shot of your buddy as he's turning or whatever, then you kind of have a little bit of an issue where, and I guess that's kind of like a devil in the details kind of thing where it's like, that's very easy to kind of gloss over because most people, they are taking still photos. But, so like, I guess that the average consumer probably wouldn't find that to be like a overall horrible issue. The camera definitely is amazing, and I do think the dual aperture is very interesting. And again, like I'm kind of starting to get into like standard cameras myself. So kind of to see that from a smartphone perspective and kind of studying it there where I'm also trying to learn about cameras is very interesting just, for my personal taste. So, I definitely think that, people, having these kind of like advanced cameras on your device where you're already spending a lot of money, it's a very interesting and very kind of like positive thing where people can have, again, just increasingly higher quality cameras. So you don't have to spend $1,000 on your phone and spend $1,000 on your DSLR if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think we're evolving towards that for sure. I mean, I became a photographer. I kind of think of myself as a photographer. I take a lot of photos and I use a lot of different cameras to take photos, and I kind of love it as a side thing. And of course, I do it for work, right? I have to take photos of other devices and stuff. But I learned on a camera phone. I started in 2004 with a Sony Ericsson W800, which was their Walkman phone at the time, but it also had a 2 megapixel autofocus camera. It was the first autofocus camera phone. And there was an equivalent Cybershot model. So, typical Sony, they did two phones that were identical. One was more focused on the music with a Walkman phone. The other one more focused on the camera, the Cybershot. But both, if you looked at the specs, they were identical except for cosmetics and what was bundled in the box. There was a better pair of headphones than the Walkman one. And I think like a lens cleaner on the camera one, but they were the same. And I learned with that. And this was slow, it performed poorly in low light, etc. But I learned so much. It restricted my ability to be artistic so much that I learned to be creative. And then eventually, I evolved into what we have now. And I take I like to think I take great photos with cameras, with phones, I mean. And if you look on my Instagram, which is @tankgirl, just like my Twitter, TNKGRL, just check it out. You'll see there's a bunch of photos. The point I'm making is that eventually I graduated to cameras, kind of like what you're talking about, where I was, okay, I think I've outgrown how creative I can be on these smartphones, even though I love smartphones photography. I'm going to move on to cameras. And I went all the way up to, thankfully not having to buy any of them, because at the time I worked at Engadget, so I had access. But I went up to, using like D800 Nikons and 5D Mark III at the time from Canon. The bottom line is I got to play with some serious cameras. And today, if I had the money, I'd buy an Alpha 7 from Sony in a heartbeat, right? I have a Sony NEX, which is a APS-C camera with interchangeable lenses, mirrorless, and I love it. It's a really old one. I use that for work. I have a Fujifilm X30, which I really love as well, because it's got all the analog controls you can imagine. It's kind of magical. And so, I have kind of gone beyond the phone for sure. But like you, I feel like I'm growing as a photographer now into standard cameras. So that's exciting. Yeah. And of course the Galaxy S9 and the Pixel and all these other phones, iPhone 10 are still they're getting closer and closer to getting out of my out of a high-end point and shoot like the RX100, out of a mirrorless APS-C camera. And I think there's going to be a time where we're going to be very close to DSLR performance, and a lot of it is going to be driven by computational photography. Mm-hmm. So I'm super stoked about the future of camera on phones and of mobile photography. I hope you are too.
Definitely. I mean, and we were saying before, just kind of the idea of even, and I've kind of written about this myself, where you've got the dual lens cameras from all of these other companies, but then again, Google comes out with this camera with one lens, and it takes, it was on the top of the ExoMark for 15 seconds before the next device came out. But still, it's kind of, and that was kind of something that I wanted to delve into, kind of how the Pixel is keeping up with the devices that are now coming out. And, in a couple months, it's going to be a year old, so.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
So yeah, I mean, that's just, and I feel even, there is even a lot to be said about people who would love to get into photography, but they don't, they wouldn't know where to start. But they have, hey, even if they're just hey, I'm just an Apple fan, so I'm just going to get the iPhone 10 because that's the latest thing. And again, they can play around with it and get some kind of grasp, but maybe then feel a little bit more confident to delve into a more advanced camera system. So again, it's kind of you get the benefits, wherever you can get them, and in general, kind of, our society is just kind of melding into this where anyone can be a creative. It's not just the person who's famous. It's not just the famous painter or the famous actor. Pretty much, if you really have the drive, if you really have the interest and want to put that time into it, you can literally make yourself into a creative, even if you thought you didn't have a creative bone in your body.
Totally. I think it's opening up all kinds of artistic opportunities for people, and they're using them, which really makes me happy. So I want to talk about the P20. Leaks more about the Huawei P20, which is going to have 3 cameras in the back. But before I do, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Audible. If you guys like audiobooks, audible.com is really the place to be. So go check them out. I actually don't listen to that many audiobooks, but when I do, I find some really cool ones. The most recent one that I downloaded is, of course, The Last Jedi, Star Wars. That's out now. So I've been kind of binging on that on this road trip. I'm on a road trip, and it's like an 11-hour audiobook. It's really awesome. So go check out Audible, and the URL for that is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Again, I want to thank Audible for being the sponsor of this podcast. If you love audiobooks, this is the place to be. And again, Star Wars just came out. So if you're a Star Wars person, this is your chance to get it right now. And help the podcast, help support the podcast. So P20, what do you think?
I haven't been following it that closely, just kind of knowing the pretty basic rumors and kind of standard specs. But I mean, we've already seen Huawei kind of going in this trajectory with the Mate 10 and the Pro, and there's the Porsche edition. I can't remember what it's called. So again, I'm not surprised to see them kind of just pushing forward with this AI concept. And, I think it will definitely be interesting to see how companies move forward with their definition of AI, because it still just kind of feels like and again, I've had this conversation. It's like, is AI and machine learning the same thing, or are they separate entities, And then, again, I feel like when we hear companies talk about AI, it still seems so rudimentary to be something where it's like, the phone can do it for you. And again, it's kind of like ironic that a lot of kind of across the board, the AI features kind of seem to be localized around the camera, as opposed to, the things that are actually making the device better. Like there's the attempts with voice assistants and things like that. But I feel like over time, a lot of those things are kind of falling by the wayside. And then everyone is focusing their supposed AI features on the camera, which I think that's very interesting. And it's just, it's kind of just observing how it's going to develop over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious what they're going to do with this triple camera system. The rumors are that this is the dual camera system we're familiar with, in essence, with the Mate 10 Pro. Mm-hmm. So one monochrome sensor, high res, one color sensor, lower res with OIS. Combine the two and you can get more detail, better low light, and you can do cool stuff with the monochrome mode for artistic purposes. But the third lens is a zoom lens, a ×2. So now it has, essentially like the best of what we've seen with the Mate 10 Pro, and the best with what we've seen with, the Galaxy S9, with the I should say the S9 Plus, which has the zoom lens, and the Note 8 and the iPhone 10 in one phone, which is, pushing the envelope. And it'll be interesting to see this leak. I'll link to it, has also a photo of a notch in the front of the display. Notches are very controversial. I want to ask you in a second what you think, but personally, they don't bother me that much. I think that it's not so much the notch that bothers me, but the way the software is done around the notch. And personally, I think Apple has dropped the ball on that one. What I was really surprised with, ASUS, as you know, launched the Zenfone 5 at MWC, and they have a notch on the 5 and the 5Z, I believe. And again, copycat. You can go on here on a rampage about how ASUS is just trying, made the thing look exactly like an iPhone and then failed miserably because it has a chin at the bottom part of the display. But let's not go there. I'm not interested in bashing ASUS right now. What I'm interested in is pointing out that they did one thing right that I think Apple should have done right. Better. And it's the fact that when you watch videos and look at photos on the ASUS Zenfone 5, it cuts out the notch completely. So it goes away. And it just reverts to, having essentially a bit of bezel because of it. But you know what? I think that's brilliant. I think that's the way to go. I don't mind the notch. It could be an interesting aesthetic thing. I don't mind it at all when it's just showing the signal strength and the time on the sides and you're using it in portrait mode. But I think in landscape, it should automatically blank out the notch and get rid of it. And no matter what you're doing, and on the iPhone, it doesn't do that. And I'm hoping maybe with iOS 12, we'll get that fixed. But the reality is I'm not against notch, but I can see people's concerns with them. What's your take on the notch?
I kind of have the same critique of it, that just kind of the general software optimization on the iPhone in particular. And I mean, the very first notch that we've seen was the Essential phone. And again, there was the rah-rah. Like, I kind of agree. There is, we can kind of complain about that, but the issue honestly really isn't the notch. It is the way that the software and programs look on the device because of it. And there should be some kind of way to have the user experience not be hindered because of the design. That's kind of the whole point. Like, if, what's the point of having the unique design if it's going to cause kind of like a functionality problem for users? So like, that is something that I definitely agree with just kind of like, I wasn't at the Asus launch, but I mean, you hear about all the details. So, that is definitely like a really good thing to kind of focus on because, I mean, I don't know how, like, personally, I guess, well, I feel like in terms of video watching, I use my phone a little bit more for like watching YouTube and things like that, as opposed to kind of sitting down and watching a movie. Even if I'm kind of like on a long trip or something, I'm more likely to like download like a long YouTube video. I watch kind of like a lot of people that do kind of podcast style videos on YouTube. I wouldn't necessarily download like a movie, or I would put that on a tablet or a laptop or something. So, that's my frame of reference for watching videos on a smartphone where, even though you can do it, most people I know are not watching movies on
I think that's because
smartphone.
That's because we're old. Kids these days, it's a different story, I'm telling you. But yeah.
Yeah, I think again, like, I feel like the biggest issue about the notch is honestly just the software optimization, and I mean, one would think and one would hope that would be kind of like a pretty easy issue to fix. So again, like, the cycles go by very quickly. So if anyone's gonna rah-rah, we'll see for the next software if it's optimized. Then people can complain about whatever they have to complain about.
For sure, yeah. I think you bring up a good point. But the reason I brought up the notch with the P20 was basically just because I'm wondering if they're going to have this Face ID we talked about, or an equivalent to Face ID of the iPhone, the face authentication. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, will they have more than one camera in the front as well, in the sense of like a portrait mode using dual cameras in the front? Mm-hmm. So let's find that out. That's the big mystery right now. Mm-hmm. We'll see. I mean, I'm excited. The Mate 10 Pro has been one of my favorite phones of last year, and it's a solid one. And let's see how it goes.
Yeah. I do enjoy the Mate 10. Kind of like how you said you're like a fan of boxy phones, and that's kind of one thing I like about the Mate 10. I feel like it's very sleek and kind of just like looks a little bit more important than a lot of other devices on the market. But that's just me.
It's true. It's true. I agree. And then, what else do we have? We have rumors of the LG G7 finally again. Wow. That's cool.
The G7, the whole thing around that was so strange. Like, and again, like, I just kind of kept like half an eye on it. I haven't been following it that closely. And I know there's the rumor that there was like a secret meeting at Mobile World Congress.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, we've seen photos that clearly look like they were taken on like in and off, and they're like on some part of the show floor. Of the G7's been, kind of originally dropped and, being kind of redone because LG wanted to be more competitive. That's the rumor. Mm-hmm. And they certainly didn't have anything at MWC other than the V30, V30S and S Plus, which I have, by the way, a device, and I've been testing. And honestly, it just feels like a really high-end. This one has 256 gigs of storage on it. It's pretty awesome. It feels like a high-end version of the V30 with all the awesome audio and awesome camera features. But they've added some AI camera things. And honestly, I don't see a huge improvement in the performance of the camera. I just feel that obviously there's some stuff like barcode scanning and auto recognition, like basically the same stuff that Bixby Vision brings, the same time that what's it called? Pixel Lens or Google Lens brings, all of that. But we didn't see much from LG other than this revamped same hardware V30 and V30S. And now we want a G7. We all want a G7. So this leak, this rumor, whatever it is, this thing that happened at MWC. First of all, I want to tell the LG folks, where was I for this thing? Hello?
Where was I? That's what I want to know. I wasn't invited either.
I know. I mean, these folks have a pretty good relationship with me. I'm like, hello. I mean, they gave me a V30S at the show. I mean, come on. But at the same time, I'm like, I would have loved to have my eyes on that. Anyway, we don't know much about it. What would you want out of a G7 if there was such a thing?
I mean, I feel like, LG has done a very good job at kind of experimenting with the G series. And, if there's anything that, I guess, that's kind of like a blessing and a curse because, they tested various things out. Like, was it the G5? They tried to bring back the
modular,
Yeah. So like that's kind of been like a very interesting test bed. So I feel like that's kind of like where we've come to a head with the G series, where there's been so many, like kind of in an effort to give the consumers what they want, they've kind of gotten lost in the fray because it's like, like that. I'm sure, I don't know what your take is on like removable backs and things like that. But, the G5 came up because everybody was complaining that, all the companies were moving to the unibody design and they wanted their removable back. They wanted, to be able to take their batteries out. And then so LG's like, OK, here you go. And then it's a problem. So it's like, that's kind of like, again, that's a double-edged sort of kind of like, dare I say, listening to the consumer.
Yeah, well, listen, the rule is, is not listening to the computer. I hate to say this, but Apple's got it right in many ways. Is you don't innovate by listening to the consumer.
Yeah.
You need to move forward and come up with crazy things. Some of them stick, some of them don't. Look at Samsung, even Samsung. We always bash Samsung for copying Apple, but look, the reality is the Note, they made the Note, and it's probably the most successful, like proof is in the pudding story of all times. Yes, we need bigger phones. It's a thing. Everybody wants bigger phones. It's happening. I mean, not everybody, obviously. I appreciate a small phone like the new Sony, ZX2 compact. Yeah. But the point is, I think most people are very well served by large phones and are very popular. And the Note series is an example of that. Sometimes Samsung throws the dart onto the target and it falls right off the target, like the Galaxy camera. I mean, the reality is they've been innovative. And look, Apple finally made big phones because of Samsung. So the thing is, I think, is that, you don't want to listen. You just want to go ahead and do something. And, to me going back to LG, the G5 was such a miss because not so much because it was modular. I think personally, I don't like interchangeable backs and batteries. I do believe that the unibody way is the better way because it makes phones more rugged, more compact, because you have less, you don't have to structurally design around the battery compartment, etc. There's all kinds of advantages. It's also less of a point of failure because you don't have connectors that can oxidize and stuff. As an engineer myself, I can see totally why we've gone unibody on everything and put batteries that are not removable. Lithium-ion batteries have gotten so reliable and so strong that you don't need to replace them. In the early days, it was because the batteries would fail that they were replaceable. Now, it doesn't matter to me. Having to remove a battery physically means your phone shuts down. Having a battery pack that you plug your phone into with USB-C means your phone doesn't shut down. It continues, it recharges. And yes, it's a bit cumbersome because you're carrying this extra thing that's tethered. But at the same time, you don't have to reboot. You don't have to lose your clipboard. storage. You don't have to, I mean, there's a lot of kinds of advantages. I mean, that battle's been fought and lost. Anybody who wants a removable battery and removable back at this point can go suck it, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to say that the G5 was, I don't think necessarily a bad idea because of listening to consumers and they wanted to be different. The implementation was terrible. It was poorly designed. The phone felt cheap. There was all kinds of problems with the matching up of the parts, like seams and things that were making it cheap and flimsy looking. The fact that it was painted metal instead of like an anodized metal or whatever made it feel like a cheap plastic phone when we all know it was metal. I mean, it was a litany of problems. The G6 to me really fixed all that. And unfortunately, I don't know why, but they didn't come out with a Snapdragon 835 on the G6. They should have.
Well, I mean, that was like, from what I understand, it was because of the whatever exclusivity that Samsung had to release.
That's true,
release the 835 on
because
their
they make
device
it
first, and then LG released the G6 at CES or Mobile Congress.
Mobile Congress.
So, and then the S8 came out a month later. So I'm not sure in terms of like release timing. Like obviously there's companies will think that there's a benefit to kind of being first to market. So maybe that's like, like one thing they wanted to have kind of like the first device of the year. And, that was kind of, and then not having the latest hardware,
Totally. No, I get that. I understand what you're saying. And that's absolutely totally correct. I just wish that, I felt like they basically the V30 was the phone that addressed all the issues of the G6, right?
Yeah.
And the V30 was the flagship and should have been the flagship. But in the past, the V30 was the Note competitor. And this year, the V30 was really the flagship. It wasn't a Note competitor. In fact, it's barely as bigger than an iPhone 10. It's not a large screen phone. I mean, it is, but in this great scheme of things, the Note 8 totally eclipses it. So it's an interesting strategy. And I think that's kind of why they regrouped, because the G7 can't screw that up, because they do need to make a V40, which I feel might need to return to being either a multimedia powerhouse or a Note competitor in a larger form factor. But, the G6 last year, and again, you're right about the Snapdragon 835 issue. I mean, having a phone launch towards the end of the 821's lifespan without the quad DAC in our market, which meant the audio wasn't, a distinguishing feature, was a bit of a disappointment. They fixed all that with E30, and now I can't wait for the G7. What I want them to do, this is what I want LG to do, and if you're listening, LG, if it's not too late, this is what I want from your phone. I want someone to, like the wide angle on all the LG phones is being a godsend. I use it way more than the zoom lens on my other phones, and I want to see a triple camera where you have the wide angle, the 2x zoom, and the regular lens on one phone. And please, 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 if you don't do this with the G7, LG, please do that with the V40, because then you will have the killer camera system for a phone.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's my request. Let's move on to maybe the HTC 12 rumors. So we know that HTC is going to make probably one final phone. This has been very controversial, ever since I've been calling it for a while now, that when this Google acquiring most of HTC happened recently, like engineering, that I called HTC dead in the smartphone world. I said that it was the beginning of them going away. And I don't say that in a mean way. I love HTC so hard. I'm the biggest HTC fangirl ever. But I have to be realistic. How can you sustain yourself? And so I figured that they would make one more flagship and I would be done. And I'm calling it. I think the 12 HTC 12 will be U12, I guess, will be the last. And I think that this is definitely true potentially because of the head of we covered this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, the head of HTC's phone division leaving, right? That doesn't bode well to me. So a lot of people say, yeah, Miriam, you were right. Look, it's premature to say I was right. I don't want to be right. Okay, I want HTC to continue making a bazillion phones that we love. But the U12 is hopefully still happening, and I'm curious to see what they're going to do. What do you think will happen? I mean, these rumors are interesting, but I want to hear what you have to say about it.
I definitely kind of like in the notes that I took down, I kind of like was just musing the same thing, just like if pretty much HTC's entire, hardware development team is at Google, like what are they going to do? Like, are they going to like build kind of like a new smartphone business or shut it down? So I definitely think, that is kind of, that the premise that you're going with is kind of in the right direction. And, it's really hard to say what's going to happen because, I am also a fan of HTC. I feel like a lot of, when I first started in the industry, that was one of the first companies that I really started working with closely. So, if their phone division, shut down, I too would not be, quite happy. I think, HTC over the years, they kind of, they not really, I wouldn't necessarily say like an underdog, but again, like,
they kind of are, yeah.
Oh, I guess
agree.
so. But, kind of attempting to get to that like flagship status, like a Samsung or an Apple. And I think that they, they're kind of that, the company where people don't really acknowledge that a lot of the technologies that we prize in our devices today were kind of, introduced on a lot of HTC devices. Like even just kind of like, like even thinking like there was for a while before like the whole kind of like DxOMark war started. I would note that I believe it was maybe like 2016. There was for a time where the 3 top phones on DxOMark were all had cameras that were made by HTC, or the hardware was made by HTC, and it was like the U12. There was like maybe like whatever whatever HTC had another device, and it was the original Pixel. So
yeah,
like it was all like the top 3. And no one is going to sit there and be like, oh, no one would sit there and be like, oh, well, HTC is this huge camera innovator. No, we all knew that, kind of like the HTC Google partnership was kind of like, quote unquote, under the rug, under wraps, where, maybe a lot of people wouldn't recognize that. But that's something that I noticed where there in fact was a lot of technology that came out of HTC that maybe it wasn't prized in their actual phones, but, it is something that kind of has helped push mobile tech along to the trajectory that we're seeing now. And, it is kind of unfortunate that, if this is kind of like the waning of their smartphone division, it is kind of sad because I feel like I know a lot of people as well. I have a friend who I feel like she had an HTC device probably up until like last year, and it was like an old one, and she used it way beyond its expiry date. She loved
she
that
hung
device,
on to it, right? She stuck to it, yeah.
And like today, like again, like even my friends who are frugal, they'll be like, okay, like I've had this thing for 2 years, iPhone, Samsung. I've had this thing for 2 years. I'm ready as soon as pre-orders are on for the next device. I want it. I'm not holding on to this a second longer than I have to. And I feel like, anytime that I've seen someone hold on, like really, really hold on to a device, it's been an HTC device. So, I hope that is a credit to HTC that, there are people that love those devices, and, we'll see we'll see what happens. But I mean, obviously they're not out of the game because, they've delved very much into VR. So,
for sure. Yeah, there's a Vive. Yeah.
The Vive is still alive and kicking, and probably, we'll see how the VR industry goes, which is kind of, like I said, I feel like there's like a weird slowdown right now in that sector, not just for HTC, but just in general. But, it's, there are things that they're still into. But I definitely do. I don't have an answer, but I have that question mark of, I'm kind of looking to see what will happen with their smartphone division.
Yeah, no, I think, look, they were super successful for a long time. Then they became a bit of an underdog. That's why we loved them even more, because their products were so good, and they still are. The U11 is a great phone. The 10 before that was a great phone, and I think the U12 will be a great phone. What we know so far is, of course, Snapdragon 845, of course, dual camera system in the back, which is a return for HTC. They did the HTC One M8 that had a dual camera system. And then we are going to see of course, a bezel-less 18:9 or full screen kind of display, which they already did on the U11 Plus, but we never got this in the US, and I wasn't even able to get a review in it, despite having some very good contacts at HTC. It's a tough one to get your hands on, but we'll wait and see, right? I mean, I'm rooting for the U12. I just want everyone to know I'm out there. I'm there. Quickly covering a few more things before we wrap up. I brought these subtopics up, just simply because they're interesting. Huawei very quietly announced the Mate SE in the US. And the Mate SE is really the Honor 7X that the rest of the world is getting, because we got the Honor 7X, which to me is the best sub $200 phone in the US today. We got that phone in December or whatever it was, and it's a great phone. The only thing that I kind of docked it for was lack of NFC, so you can't do Android Pay, and a micro USB connector, which, I understand for some people, they're still in that world, and it's a big change. Like, my mom is the person that I wouldn't want to have to change all of her chargers overnight until the absolute last minute, her next phone maybe, but not now. Okay. And I can understand that, but I mean, for us reviewers, USB Type-C is the only way to fly. So the 7X in the rest of the world has 4 gigs of RAM and I think 64 gigs of storage, whereas the 7X in the US has only 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage. So that's kind of the difference. And so this Mate SE basically is the same phone as the 7X in the rest of the world, but as a Huawei phone. And this brings up something that I just wanted to touch on real quick, and it's that I still don't understand Huawei and the whole Honor Huawei thing. And they've tried to explain this to us journalists in many different ways, and every time we look at them, roll our eyes and go, seriously, really? No, none of this makes any sense. Get over it. It's Huawei no matter what. Yeah. I think that now that with all this political crap around Huawei in this crazy regime we live in, I think that Huawei should actually give it up on selling phones as Huawei devices in the US, and they should focus on selling them as Honor phones, only Honor. And so
I thought that's what they were doing to begin with.
Well, this insistence of coming out with a Mate SE that's Huawei branded that is a little better than the Honor. Really, Huawei? What the hell are you doing? Like, this does not make any sense. Oh, man.
I mean, I thought I thought that was the plan from the beginning, because I remember some of the first ones there was, I can't remember what, was it the Honor 8 that was announced in San Francisco like 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, like, again, and then, there have been several Honor brand phones that have been announced at CES and stuff like that. So again, like, I kind of agree, like, from what I've heard from Huawei, that they were intending to kind of market their Honor brand for the US, where, kind of like these like fun, flirty phones. I know that, like, obviously they have a better standing in Asia and Europe and stuff like that. And even in Europe, where it's kind of like, the Honor brand is kind of very popular among young people and stuff like that. So I thought they were kind of just using that marketing strategy and bringing it to the US, and not really worrying about kind of bringing the Mate series and kind of their flagship devices to the US, at least maybe not right now. Like, even give it a couple more years for people to kind of get used to the Honor brand, and maybe then like change trajectory. But I feel like, again, it's like, we haven't gotten a chance to really know Huawei in the US in any capacity. And then it's just kind of like more phones. And it's like, they have so many devices that it's really is kind of like a, which one do you get from their repertoire? Like, like, there's only so many iPhones you can get. There's only so many Samsung devices you can get. But it seems like every few weeks you can kind of, get a a new Huawei device. And that's kind of, something that, again, like a company like Samsung was critiqued about that in the past, where it's like, okay, you've got so many versions, of the same phone. This one's just got a little bit more battery power. This one's got a stylus. This one has, this amount of RAM. This one has the special feature that the other one has, but it all essentially is the same device. And you can only use the excuse of, oh, well, it's, we're kind of trying to cater to this specific market. Well, this market likes this feature. So we're going to release this version of this same phone over here and a slightly different version over here. And that didn't work. We've seen it not work before. So that is where I'm like, they're kind of treading on thin ice with this kind of just like constantly pushing out phones, kind of trying to see which market sticks, where, like, again, when we first started seeing Honor come to the US, I kind of thought that was, a really good plan. Like I said, like my Honor 8, I used that phone for a decent amount of time. I enjoyed that phone, and I think that if they had kind of continued in that realm, at least for a while, like, I'm not like a company executive to call those shots, but again, if the whole idea is targeting young people, targeting millennials, who, by the way, the Brooklyn Decker kid that they brought out, not a millennial, Huawei. He's not a millennial.
I know, it's so funny.
They, like, I feel like, again, the whole idea is that the device is, very stylish looking, nice colors and things like that. But then also it was not super expensive. So it's like, hey, like if you've got like the kids who are like, oh, well, I like this phone because it's cute and compact and shiny and stuff like that. And the parents don't have to spend $1,000 on an iPhone 10. There's kind of a win-win if your kid picks the Honor device, because it looks cool and I don't have to pay all that money. Like, I felt like that was a really good strategy. But, then you have all of these, and again, just the idea of, well, we know that Honor and Huawei are the same thing, but, other people don't know that Huawei and Honor are the same thing. So again, it's like, if people were getting used to Honor, then you throw the actual Huawei brand out there. Even people who are accustomed to Honor are not going to know to say, well, hey, well, the Huawei device is kind of like an option under the same umbrella, and that's kind of very confusing.
You got it. You totally nailed it. I agree with you 100%. Speaking of, I just want to mention this because I didn't tell you guys last week, but I was in France after and before Mobile Congress to visit my mom, who lives in the south of France. And my mom needed a new phone. And just before I left for the US, the Honor PR folks gave me an Honor 9 Lite, which is a European market phone. Well, it's also available in parts of Asia, China, but it's they're pushing very hard in Europe. And of course, when I went to see my mom, she says I need a new phone, and I was like probably going to get her a Galaxy A8, which, as you know, is pretty popular in Europe. And then I saw this phone. And of course, I had just received one and I hadn't had a chance to play with it, but I'd kind of like taken it out of the box and did an unboxing video on my channel. And you can see that on my YouTube. And I was impressed with that phone. So I said, Mom, I think you should get this phone. Your carrier has it. Let's go get it. So we got it and I was blown away. So this is what you should know. And this goes back into this whole conversation about Honor and Huawei launching so many phones that kind of step over each other. The Honor 9 Lite is not an offspring of the Honor 9. It's actually its own kind of device. It's basically an Honor 7X with NFC and a glass back and a smaller front display. Instead of 5.9 inches of 5.5 or 5.7 inches. It's still 18:9 full screen. It has dual camera in the front and in the back.
Oh my.
And NFC. And all the things, and the same chipset and same specs and all the things we love about the 7X with a glass back. Get this, 179 euros.
Nice.
This is insane. I don't think they make money on this phone. I think they're dumping them in Europe to really get their brand out there. Mm-hmm. And for that price, I said, you can't lose, Mom. This is a great phone. And so since then, I got back from Mobile Congress and I went on this road trip. And I've taken the phone with me in my pocket, and I'm really impressed. It's essentially what I just said. It's a 7X with a glass back and with NFC, and it adds a dual front camera in addition to dual rear camera. Mm-hmm. And you can't fault this phone for about 179 euros. It's insanely well priced. Mm-hmm. So check it out. It's on my YouTube. And check out my Instagram and Twitter. There'll be some photos taken with the phone. But this again, you're again like adding salt into this wound. Like you now have another phone that doesn't exist in the US, but should, and is really cool, and et cetera, et cetera. So wow, it's kind of crazy. Anyway, we should probably wrap it up. What is your daily driver, Fionna? What do you use every day right now? You said Galaxy S8?
Yeah, I have the S8 right now. Again, we'll see. I'm very strange just because I kind of started using my S8 after the Note 8 came out, as opposed to using the Note 8 as my daily driver. So I feel like now that the S9 is going to come out, I'm about to switch to the Note 8.
Of course. Like that. Yeah. That's fine. I mean, that's fair, I think.
But yeah, I mean, my S8 is Old Faithful. Before that, I was using the S7 Edge, which I got. And that's kind of like, I feel like my favorite thing about the S9 is that they brought back coral blue. I'm so excited. I feel like that's like the best device color I've ever seen. Like, I remember I have a good friend who she kind of lives vicariously through me for all the tech stuff. And when, that came out on the Note 7 and she literally got the Note. She had just gotten a device maybe 6 months ago, and she dropped her old device and got the Note 7 just because of the coral blue. And, obviously, what happened with we know what happened with that, but she was devastated, when she wasn't able to use that device anymore. And for me, I wasn't able to purchase the Coral Blue Note 7. So I got the Coral Blue S7 Edge, and that was my daily driver for a long time. But yeah, I think that for me, I'm a pretty big color snob, and I always gripe at Samsung that the colors that I really, really liked, and this is kind of over several years ago, but the colors that I always really liked were never in the US. So it's like when the gold came out, US doesn't get it. When the silver came out, US doesn't get it. So I would always complain that I'm like, come on, there are people in the US that want these colors. Why are you teasing us like this? So I feel like Coral Blue was my saving grace, where I was actually able to purchase the device that I wanted in the color that I wanted in the US.
Yeah. I'm personally excited about the purpley, whatever color.
Yeah.
That's what
that one is very nice as well. But like I said, I feel
Coral blue for you. Yeah. We know. Listen, do you want to tell people where they can find you on the internets?
Definitely. So as Miriam said, I'm a freelance writer right now, and you can find me on Twitter at Techie Supreme, one word, and I have more contact information there. I am formerly from Business Insider and International Business Times, and so you can go find my archives there as well. And if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, or like I said, I have further contact information on my Twitter profile, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. And you guys, if you are looking for somebody to write stories for you, hit up Fionna, and you know where to find me online. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL. It's like the comic book character without the vowels. That's how you'll remember. You'll find me on Twitter and Instagram with that. I did not manage to get that for YouTube. So if you want to go to my YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. My full name spelled out Miriam with a Y. Remember, there's a lot of videos there that show you some of the products we discuss on the show. I don't have a Galaxy S9 yet, but it's coming, so stay tuned for that. But all these other phones we talked about, you can check out there. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. mobiletechpodcast.com, I'm going to repeat that. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL, and you can find the RSS feed there for your podcast app. And of course, we're on iTunes, we're on Pocket Cast, and all that good stuff. I want to do a shout out quickly to Audible for being our sponsor, and of course to World Podcasts for being our producers and hosting the podcast. And stay tuned, we'll have more next week. Fionna, thanks so much for being on. It was a delight to have you on. I hope you come back sometime soon.
Definitely. Thank you for inviting me, and I would love to come back.
Yay, we'll make it happen. All right, folks, that's it. And stay tuned to next week. Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.